Hey, what's up, lightboltjoe here. Today we are going to discuss the 2022 Rick Rider Presents sequel book, Paolo Santiago and the Sanctuary of Shadows, written by Taylor K. Mejia. So this is the third and final book in the Paolo Santiago series. This came out August of 22. So this book was awesome. I'm going to preface that by saying that. Okay. Third and final book was awesome. It had a great ending, amazing character development, and year and days later epilogue. Very happy with how it ended. I'm very satisfied with how it ended. The first book I absolutely hated, and I expressed in a lengthy review of why I hated it. It was false advertising, with La Llorona being the main, antagonist through the entire thing when she was in like the last couple chapters, and it didn't make sense. The pacing was weird. It was just strange. The second book, Forest of Something, better, and it was good, and it was more explanations in regards to getting backstory. Her father, Beto Santiago, was fused. Beto is the actual son of La Llorona, and he was fused with this Javier soul because of this, chamber device that was being produced in the void, where you could fuse a soul with a dead person to then bring them back to the living. Very interesting. And then we elaborated more on that. So now it's a matter of La Llorona's gone and Beto's back in the real world. Beto's back in the mortal world. And the void is the in-between, between the crossing over aspect and the mortal realm. So what happens when you're in between, when you're in the void? Well, who's now in charge of the void? If La Llorona was doing the underworld stuff, La Llorona was doing the void stuff, but she's gone now. So it's El Kukui, who is, I just butchered this pronouncing of the name, but the boogeyman. And the boogeyman is now the bad guy in charge, and he's now, trying to get all the he wants to take over the world. He wants the destruction of the world, so that way there is no more living and dead. It's just dead. And I was like, oh, this is amped. This is getting amped. And he's like right in the beginning, and we get the going through. So it's 8 months since our intrepid heroes have left the void. Dante was captured. He was still trapped in the void. So Paolo and company are still trying to figure out how the hell to get him out of the void and what's up. Because she knows that she is still part void, because Pau is the granddaughter of La Llorona. So how does that work within the mortal realm? How does that work with her trying to figure out life in general, trying to save her best friend Dante 8 months later, trying to figure out what's going on with these different feelings that she has for her other best friend Emma, who was originally trapped in the void as well. Things. So Pau and Emma have a sleepover. She hijacks this Rogue Rainbows volunteer trip. They go to a ranch in Texas. They then hijack a bus after defeating a shadow version of the counselor that was there, their chaperone, Poppy. And a shadow version of these individuals are copies that El Kuiku Boogeyman, that the Boogeyman is making with these chamber devices that Javier and Franco and Beto were all talking about. And so it's now a matter of, we have the Los Niños, right? That little group of renegades who, are forever children, much like the Neverland kids. But it's a matter of what happens when the veil is the thinnest. What happens when the portal is now open and these shadow copies, these copies of these people can come through. And how do you become copied? Well, if you have a nightmare, the boogeyman has access to parts of you. If you, drift between life and death, like if you're in an accident and you die for a bit, you're therefore in the void, but then you can come back. So he has copies of different people, and he's has copies of Pau now closing different access points to get into the void. So Pau wants to try to fight this girl, realizing that it's a copy of herself, pretending she's a copy of herself to get the actual what the hell's going on from, the boogeyman, why he wants to do this. Thinks she's saving Dante, but it turns out it's a copy of Dante the entire time. And then we see the real Dante. And then throwing all this together, Dante's grandmother, right, is actually Pau from the future in a different timeline. And I'm like, bro, this is Back to the Future all of a sudden. It was explained so eloquently within the timeline aspect that I'm going back to the past to give you the knowledge that I've had, because I was a Los Niños for, 200 years. So I've lived. I know what we need to do now to change this, change it, so that way you can live peacefully and happily and don't have to worry about the things that I had to do. Um, so it was a very interesting, because it was leading up to this battle, right? The void is going to open, the shadows are going to come out. So it's going to be spirit realm versus mortal realm, and what's going to happen when the dead come back. And then the dead come back, and then Dante's Apollonius reveals the truth of it, and I'm like, bro, this took a turn I didn't expect. But then again, these books are multiverse books, so it makes sense within that multiverse concept, and having that explanation of, just because I had this timeline doesn't mean you need the same timeline. I married this Alberto. You don't need to marry this Alberto. And then Paola winds up with Emma at the end anyway. So it was very interesting being able to change the timeline, very much like Back to the Future, how you have to go back to the future to change the past. It's very back and forth, but it made sense in the context of it. And why I really liked this book, why I loved this book compared to all three. So their third is the best. And it's interesting because normally it's not how that works. Normally it's the first book is the best, etc., etc. But this is the reverse, because of the character development, because these characters had time to grow, and these characters had time to learn, and these characters had time to adapt. And that was the part of this, adapt and change. And I thought that was neat, expressing that, especially from the whining and complaining and the lack of pacing and false antagonist in the very first book. I had no expectations for the second, and the second surprised me. The second surprised me because it was good. And then this book came about, and I was like, bro, this is awesome. Like, I'm reading it very, very quick because it was very fast. It was very immersive. It was very scary. It was an actual terror kind of aspect. We're talking about fear a lot in this. What is the antithesis of fear? And is love the antithesis of fear? Is love the antidote to fear? What drives the boogeyman? Why is the boogeyman the boogeyman? Was he always fearful? Was he always filled with fear? Was he always creating fear? Or was he actually someone who was scared and then morphed into the fear? And one of my favorite tropes, which doesn't happen that often, is good always good and is bad always bad? Can bad become good, and will good become bad? What's that turning point where you're going to be a villain? What's that turning point when you realize you're wrong and you try to make amends? Or, well, yeah, that's the flip side of that. What happens when you're good and then something happens and you become the villain? What happens, right? We get kind of that. We get these flashes within that fear projection. We get this grumpy old man who wasn't loved and things, right? And he just morphed the fear and kept himself surrounded with that fear and became the boogeyman. And he's not the first boogeyman. So what happens to the boogeyman before him? So it's very interesting with that, because that's a trope that not normally happens. The antagonist realizing certain things, or the seeing the villain origin kind of a thing, doesn't really happen that often within that kind of reveal, if you will. So to have that conversation with future Palos / Dante's grandmother, who's not his biological grandmother, it was a very interesting combination of things. Having that reveal, getting to choose your own path, realizing that it's not love that's the antidote to fear, because when you love someone, you fear for their safety. I love my parents. I want the best for them, so I fear if they are driving in a blizzard or something like that, right? Same thing with my brother. I fear for his health if he suffers from anxiety. So if he is having a massive test he's cramming for, and he is getting chest palpitations and he doesn't have his medicine, I fear for his safety, because that's a thing that he has to deal with, right? So, but that's because I love my brother, because I love my parents, that elicits fear. So what's the antidote to fear? Well, the antidote to fear isn't love, because love creates fear, which is a very interesting psych aspect to it, and it makes a lot of sense. The antidote to fear would be community. You surround yourself with help, that it's okay to ask for help. You need to know that it is okay to ask for help, to reach out and ask for a helping hand, to fix whatever's going on, to work together, to come together realizing you're all in the same area, let's work together to fix this. And that's what this group does. They realize that they're in this particular Silver Springs part of Texas. The community comes together to fight these spirits, these shadow individuals, people, if you will. But all this is happening around the world as well, as reports are coming in and stuff like that. So it's the antithesis of fear. The antidote to fear is community. And I've never seen it expressed that way before. And I did a lot of meditation on it. No, that's not the word. I can't meditate. I can't sit still for a while. I did a lot of soul diving in regards to that explanation. I was like, this makes so much sense. And I'm surprised I've never seen this elaborated so eloquently before. And I'm very impressed with this. I'm very impressed with I can't remember the author's name ever, Taylor. I'm very impressed with how they wrote this ending and gave it an epilogue, year and a couple days later. Very impressed with it because I was so mad with reading the first book and I had no interest in reading the second book because of how bad I felt the first book was. And to have this third book making me think as much as it actually is, and for me to actually praise at how awesome this third book is, I can't wait for the TV show. Knowing how it's going to end, knowing that monologue that's going to happen at the final battle, I am so excited to see this TV show whenever it comes out on Disney Plus, because it was announced months ago that it was going to happen. I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed of the development of the characters. I'm very impressed with the development of the story. It's unfortunate that the introduction was wonky, but we got there. We got to the ending where we needed to be. We got to that communal aspect at the end, that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to ask for help. And it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous finale. Didn't like the beginning, liked the middle, loved the end. Very impressed. Very impressed. On to the next review. Mucho mahalo.